My husband threw me in the snow and his mom laughed. "Look at the trash," she yelled. I was freezing until a Rolls-Royce fleet blocked the alley. "Get in, Ms. Vance," the butler said. They didn't know I was a billionaire heiress. Now they will pay. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. He ripped my nightgown and threw me onto the icy concrete like garbage. That is how my marriage of 20 years ended. Not with a conversation, not with counseling, but with the sensation of my skin scraping against frozen asphalt. My mother-in-law stood in the doorway of the apartment building, clutching her robe against the Chicago wind, laughing. She was actually laughing. She turned her head and shouted to the entire complex, asking if a beggar wanted to come and collect me. Just as I thought I would freeze to death, just as the darkness of the alley started to close in around my vision, 3 blinding white headlights cut through the gloom. The man I swore never to call stepped out of the lead Rolls-Royce. They thought I was trash that night. They thought I was a middle-aged woman with nothing left to lose. They were unaware that soon, they would all be kneeling. My name is Meredith Vance, and at 48 years old, I am learning exactly what the freezing point of dignity feels like. It feels like concrete against bare skin. It feels like the wind off Lake Michigan stripping the breath from my lungs before I can even scream. Rick Dalton does not just open the door to our ground-floor apartment. He purges me from it. His grip on my upper arm is a vice, hard enough to leave bruises that I know will turn black by morning. But I barely register the pain in my bicep. My focus is entirely on the sensation of my body hitting the frozen landing. He throws me like a bag of refuse he has been meaning to take out for 2 decades. My silk nightgown, a delicate slip I bought on clearance for our 20th anniversary, snags on the metal railing. The sound of the fabric tearing is louder than the wind. It rips from the shoulder down to the hip, exposing my skin to the biting Chicago winter. The air is not just cold, it is aggressive. It burns like acid splashing against my ribs. My bare feet scramble for purchase on the cement stairs, but the steps are slick with a layer of black ice. I slip, my knees smashing into the sharp edge of the step, and the shock of it travels straight up my spine. Before I can stand, before I can even process the violence of the last 60 seconds, the door to Unit 3C slams shut. But it does not latch. Not yet. Beverly Dalton stands in the frame. The hallway light halos her, making her look like a distorted saint of the slums. She is holding a glass of that cheap boxed red wine she loves, the kind that stains her teeth purple. Her lipstick is a violent shade of crimson, smeared slightly at the corner of her mouth. She looks down at me, shivering and half-naked on the dirty concrete, and her lips curl. It is not a smile of victory. It is a smile of absolute cruelty. She raises a hand, her heavy gold bracelets clanking together, bracelets I paid for by skipping lunch for 3 months, and points a manicured finger toward the bottom of the stairs. There, in the dim light of the entryway, sit the metal trash cans overflowing with the week's refuse. "You belong right there, Meredith," Beverly says. Her voice is loud, designed to carry. She wants the whole building to hear. She wants the neighbors to know. Right next to the trash. Let us see if some beggar wants to pick you up. God knows my son is done with charity. Her laughter is a sharp, hacking sound that bounces off the narrow walls of the stairwell. It echoes, amplifying until it feels like the building itself is laughing at me. Then, with a finality that stops my heart, the deadbolt slides home. Click. That sound is the end of my life. I pull my knees to my chest, trying to cover the exposed skin of my torso with the shreds of my nightgown. The cold is eating me alive. I am shaking so hard my teeth rattle, a sound like dice in a cup. But we are not alone. The commotion has woken the hive around me. The heavy wooden doors of the other apartments crack open. I see the yellow slivers of light spilling onto the hallway runner. I see the shadows of people I know, people I have lived beside for 20 years. Unit 2D. The door is wide open. Kylie, my sister-in-law, the girl whose college tuition I quietly paid for by working double shifts at the library, is standing in the doorway. She is wearing an oversized hoodie. She is not looking at me with pity. She is looking at me through the screen of her smartphone. The ring light clipped to her phone is blinding. I hear the soft digital shutter sound. She giggles, a cruel, high-pitched noise, and whispers something to an unseen audience on her livestream. Drama at the complex, you guys. You are not going to believe this. The moocher is finally out. She slams her door, and darkness reclaims the hallway. My mind fractures. I look down at my hands. There's blue ink smeared on the side of my thumb. The stain is fresh. The memory crashes into me, overriding the cold. 10 minutes ago. The kitchen table. The smell of roasted chicken that I would never get to serve. Rick was screaming. He was red-faced, veins bulging in his neck, shoving a stack of papers in front of me. Sign it. Sign it. Or every executive in this city sees the photos. The photos. Grainy images of me sitting with an older man at a coffee shop. A man I knew only as the family attorney, helping me with a name change. But in Rick's narrative, he was my lover. A sugar daddy. A lie so filthy it made me gag. I will ruin you, Rick had hissed. I will post these online. I will send them to your volunteer board. Sign the divorce papers. Sign over the accounts. Do it. Or you walk out of here with a reputation so destroyed you will never get a job cleaning toilets. I remember the pen shaking in my hand. I signed because I was terrified. I signed because I thought if I gave him what he wanted, the yelling would stop. I signed away the savings. I signed away the car. I signed away the rights to the apartment. The ink is still on my thumb. And now, as the wind howls through the alley, I realize I didn't just sign a divorce paper. I signed my own death warrant. Thank you so much for joining me today. I know this is intense, and I appreciate you being here. If you are watching from Chicago, or anywhere cold, let me know in the comments. I'd love to know where my listeners are tuning in from. Now, the cold is no longer painful. It is numbing. That is the dangerous part. My toes have stopped hurting. My fingers feel like wooden blocks attached to my wrists. The wind howling through the drafty stairwell sounds like a lullaby. I curl tighter into the fetal position on the landing. The concrete sucks the remaining heat from my core. A thought, calm and seductive, drifts through my mind. Maybe I just sleep here. It would be so easy. Just close my eyes. By morning, the janitor will find a frozen body curled on the mat. A naked blue corpse. The neighbors will shake their heads. They will say, she must have been on drugs. Or, it is a tragedy, but she was unstable. Beverly will tell the police I ran out in a fit of hysteria. Rick will play the grieving widower. It feels like a relief to stop fighting. To just let the winter take me. My eyes begin to close. The darkness is heavy, pressing down on my eyelids. Then, a flash down below on the ground floor near the cluster of metal mailboxes. Something blinks. A weak, intermittent light. I force my eyes open. It is my phone. Rick must have thrown it down the stairwell before he threw me. It is lying face up on the dirty tile of the lobby floor. The screen is shattered, a spiderweb of cracks refracting the backlight, but it is alive. It is glowing. My survival instinct, buried under layers of shock and hypothermia, kickstarts my heart. I move. It is not walking. I cannot walk. I crawl. I slide down the stairs. Step by agonizing step. My shredded nightgown catches on the rough edges of the metal stair nosing. My skin scrapes against the concrete, raw and bleeding. But I do not stop. I am an animal dragging itself toward the only warmth left in the universe. I reach the lobby floor. The tiles are even colder than the stairs. I pull myself toward the phone. My hand shakes so violently I can barely grasp it. I turn it over. The glass cuts my thumb, mixing fresh red blood with the blue ink stain. I do not call the police. Rick and Beverly have likely already called them with a story about a crazy ex-wife. I do not call a friend. I have none left. Rick isolated me from them years ago. I open my contacts. My vision is blurring, tunneling down to a pinpoint. I scroll to the bottom, to the letter S. There is an entry there. One I have stared at 1,000 times but never touched in 20 years. Silas. I remember the day I put it there. I was 28, standing in the mahogany-paneled library of Ravensgate Estate. My grandfather had gripped my shoulder. His eyes were steel. "You are leaving us for him," he had said. "But remember, Meredith. If you hit the bottom, if there is no other way out, you call this number. But once you make that call, the housewife dies, and the VANCE returns." I press the call icon. 1 ring. 2 rings. The line clicks open. Silas Thorne speaking. The voice is deep, calm, and terrifyingly familiar. It sounds like old money and absolute power. Silas Thorne, the ghost of the VANCE empire, the man who cleans up the messes that the law cannot touch. My throat is frozen. I try to speak, but my teeth chatter, cutting off the words. I force my jaw to lock. I have been kicked out. Silence on the other end. Not a confused silence, a waiting silence. "Location," he says. No questions. No "how are you?" Just the command. 403 West Huron, I whisper. The alley entrance. I am freezing. Silas. "Stay conscious, Ms. Vance," he says. The line goes dead. I drop the phone. I lean my head against the metal row of mailboxes. I wait. Time loses its meaning. It might have been a minute. It might have been an hour. The cold has moved into my chest, squeezing my heart, slowing its rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. Then, the light changes. The darkness of the street outside the glass lobby doors is suddenly obliterated. It starts with a low hum, a vibration that I feel in the floor tiles before I hear it. It is the sound of engineering perfection. The sound of a V12 engine that costs more than this entire city block. Bright white light floods the entryway, blinding me. It cuts through the grime on the glass, casting long, sharp shadows across the lobby. I lift my head, squinting against the glare. A car turns into the narrow, garbage-strewn alleyway. It is massive. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom. The spirit of ecstasy on the hood catches the street lamp's glow, shining like a silver angel of death. It does not come alone. Behind it, a second Rolls-Royce pulls in, then a third. They move in a predatory formation, bumper to bumper, filling the narrow space, blocking the exit, suffocating the poverty of the street with sheer, unadulterated opulence. The lead car stops. The back door opens. A man steps out. He is wearing a long wool coat and black leather gloves. He ignores the puddle of slush he steps into, a mixture of oil, trash juice, and melting snow. He looks exactly as I remember him from 20 years ago, only his hair is silver now. Silas Thorne looks up at the building, his face a mask of cold fury, before his eyes drop to the lobby floor, locking onto me. I thought I was trash tonight. I thought I was something to be discarded. But as the 3 Rolls-Royces idle in the snow, their exhaust puffing white clouds into the night air, I realize something. The cavalry has not just arrived. The war has just begun. Silas was in front of me in 2 strides. He did not ask if I was okay. He knew I was not. He stripped off his heavy charcoal coat in one fluid motion. The cold air must have hit him through his suit, but he did not flinch. He draped the garment around my shoulders. It was heavy, smelling of cedarwood, expensive dry cleaning, and safety. His hands, usually so terrifyingly efficient when signing merger documents or destroying competitors, were gentle now. He buttoned the coat from my neck down to my knees. He pulled the collar up, shielding my face, effectively sealing my humiliation inside the finest cashmere money could buy. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that only I could hear. He gripped my shoulders through the thick wool, grounding me. "You are not going to die on this concrete tonight. Ravensgate is keeping the lights on for you." Behind the wall of bodyguards, the tenement building was waking up to the reality of what was happening. I could hear the shift in the atmosphere. The laughter had stopped. The jeering from the upper floors had died in the throat of the complex. Through a small gap between two bodyguards, I saw the window of Unit 2D. Kylie was standing there, her phone still raised, but her hand had frozen. Her face, illuminated by the screen, was drained of blood. She had zoomed in. I knew she had. She was looking at the emblem on the hubcaps of the cars, the interlocked inverted Versus, and on the license plate of the lead car, the small silver crest of a raven. She knew brands. She worshipped wealth. She recognized the insignia of the VANCE Dominion Group. It was the logo she saw on the news every time the stock market rallied. It was the logo of the family she thought I had lied about belonging to. "Let us go," Silas signaled to the team. He guided me into the back of the Phantom. The leather seat was soft like butter and heated. The moment the heavy door thudded shut, the world was severed. The wind, the jeers, the smell of rotting trash, it all vanished, replaced by the scent of leather and the soft, ambient hum of climate control. I curled my legs up, tucking them under the coat. I looked down at my feet. They were gray with cold, caked in street grime and blood. They were resting on a lamb's wool floor mat that was whiter than fresh snow. The contrast made my stomach turn. I was polluting this perfection. "I am dirtying the car," I whispered. Silas ignored me. He reached into a hidden compartment in the center console and pulled out a silver thermos. He poured steaming liquid into a porcelain cup, not plastic, never plastic, and handed it to me. "Ginger and honey," he said. "Drink." I took the cup with both hands to stop them from shaking. The steam hit my face, smelling of sharp spice. I took a sip. It burned going down, a good burn that started to thaw the ice in my chest. As the car began to move, gliding over the potholes as if they did not exist, my mind drifted back. Back 20 years. I wasn't always this pathetic woman shivering in a borrowed coat. Once, I was Meredith Vance. I graduated top of my class from Wharton at 22. I was the heir apparent to the Vance logistics empire. But I was also young, and stupidly romantic. My parents had died when I was 18, leaving behind a massive fortune and a cruel, eccentric will. It was called the Vance Challenge. To inherit the control of the company, to truly earn the name, I had to live for 20 years without accessing the family fortune. I had to build a life, find a partner, and survive on my own merits until my 45th birthday. They wanted to ensure I wouldn't be preyed upon by gold diggers. They wanted me to find someone who loved Meredith, not the billions attached to her name. And I thought I had found him. I met Rick Dalton at a library. He was charming, struggling, and seemingly kind. He didn't know who I was. I told him I was an orphan with no family. When we married, I thought I had won the challenge. I thought I had found true love. I kept my secret. I lived on his meager salary. I clipped coupons. I learned to cook cheap stews. I denied myself every luxury I had grown up with, believing that the shared struggle was noble. That it was romantic. For 20 years, I played the role of the poor, supportive wife. I waited for the clock to run out so I could reveal the truth to him, so I could shower him with the wealth we had earned together. What a fool I was. While I was playing the saint, he was playing the devil. Silas, I asked, my voice small, breaking the silence of the car. Does grandfather know? Is he angry? It was the fear that had kept me away even after the 20 years were up. I had stayed silent for 3 extra years because I was ashamed. I was ashamed that the man I chose was a failure. I was ashamed that my true love was a man who belittled me. Silas turned to me then, his eyes softening just a fraction in the rearview mirror. Sir Harlan has not slept since the moment you called. He is waiting in the main hall. He told the staff to open the main gates wide. I leaned my head back against the headrest, closing my eyes. Raven's Gate. The marble staircases that felt cold underfoot. The dinners where silence was the main course. I had run from it to find warmth with Rick, and Rick had frozen me out. Now, the cold marble of my childhood seemed like the only warm place left. The journey was a blur of motion and light. We left the gridlock of Chicago behind, the city lights smearing into long streaks of neon rain on the tinted windows. I drifted in and out of a fugue state, my body shutting down to preserve energy. Hours bled into one another. The flat expanse of the Midwest gave way to the rising shadows of the terrain as we approached the private estate grounds north of the city. By the time the sky began to bruise with the purple light of pre-dawn, we were winding up the private access road. Then I saw it. The gates of Raven's Gate Estate. They were 20 feet high, raw iron twisted into the shapes of thorny vines. In the center of each gate was the family crest, a silver raven holding a key, illuminated by uplights hidden in the stone pillars. Usually, these gates were closed, guarded by a security team that rivaled the Secret Service. But tonight, as Silas had promised, they stood wide open. The Rolls-Royce crunched over the gravel of the long, winding driveway. The estate rose out of the mist like a fortress. It was a limestone manor that had stood for 80 years. Every window in the house was lit. It looked like a lighthouse in a dark ocean. The car came to a gentle stop at the foot of the grand staircase. Silas opened my door. The air here was crisp and smelled of pine needles and cold stone, cleaner than the city smog I had just escaped. I stepped out, still clutching Silas's coat around me like a shield. My legs were weak, wobbling like a newborn foal's. The massive oak front doors swung inward. Harlan Vance stood in the entryway. He was older than I remembered. Much older. The last time I saw him, he was a titan in a 3-piece suit, shouting that I was making a mistake. Now, he was a man of 80. He was not wearing a suit. He wore a gray cashmere turtleneck and a camel-colored robe over trousers. He leaned heavily on a cane made of dark walnut wood. His face, usually a mask of severe judgment, was etched with lines of exhaustion. His white hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it for hours. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, freezing in my shame. I was the prodigal granddaughter who had failed. I was proof that he was right all along. I waited for the "I told you so." I waited for the lecture about family honor. Harlan looked at me. He took in the bruised eye, the split lip, the oversized men's coat hiding my ruined nightgown. His hand began to shake. The walnut cane clattered onto the stone porch, the sound echoing loudly in the morning silence. He did not reach for it. He took a step down the stairs, then another. He was moving faster than his bad hip should have allowed, almost stumbling in his haste. "Grandfather," I whispered, the word catching in my throat. He reached me and pulled me into his chest. He smelled of old paper, pipe tobacco, and the same soap he had used since I was 5. His arms, thin but surprisingly strong, wrapped around me, holding me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. But it was a good pain. I felt his chest heave. He was crying. The Lion of Wall Street, the man who reportedly had ice water in his veins, was weeping into my messy, dirty hair. "You called," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. Finally, you called. I buried my face in his robe, letting go of the last 20 years of pretense. He threw me out, Grandpa. He threw me away. Harlan pulled back, gripping my face in his hands. His thumbs brushed away the tears on my bruised cheeks. The sorrow in his eyes vanished, replaced instantly by a cold, hard glint of steel, the look that had built an empire and destroyed a dozen competitors. He did not throw you away, Meredith, Harlan said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. He just handed me the reason to burn his entire world to the ground. Welcome home. He guided me inside, his arm never leaving my shoulders. As the heavy doors closed behind us, shutting out the winter, I felt the first spark of something that wasn't warmth. It was heat. The heat of anger. But before the anger could truly take hold, there was the truth. And the truth, as I was about to find out, was far uglier than I could have imagined. The hot shower had scrubbed away the grime of the Chicago alley, but it could not scrub away the sensation of Rick's hands on me. I was sitting in a wingback leather chair in my grandfather's study, wearing a set of navy silk pajamas that the house staff had found in storage, relics of a life I had abandoned 2 decades ago. The room smelled of beeswax, aged paper, and pipe tobacco. It was a scent that used to make me feel suffocated by tradition. Now, it felt like the only solid thing in a world that had liquefied under my feet. Harlan sat behind his massive walnut desk. He was not playing the role of the doting grandfather anymore. He was the chairman. The lighting in the room was low, cast by a green-shaded banker's lamp, creating an atmosphere less like a family reunion and more like a Black Ops debriefing. Silas stood by the fireplace, a tablet in his hand. Drink, Harlan said, pointing to the porcelain mug in front of me. It is cocoa. You need the sugar. Then, you talk. Everything. No omissions. At Ravensgate, Meredith, we heal with truth, not illusions. I took a sip. The chocolate was rich, but it tasted like ash in my mouth. I set the cup down and began to speak. I told them the story I had believed for nearly 20 years. I told them about meeting Rick when he was a struggling logistics coordinator. I told them how we bonded over being the outcasts, him because he was poor, and me because I was pretending to be poor to escape my wealth. We struggled, I said, my voice sounding hollow in the large room. Those first years were hard. Rick was building his career. He said his salary was barely covering the bills, so I managed everything. I used coupons. I walked instead of taking the bus. I dipped into the small inheritance allowance Mom and Dad left for emergencies. I transferred it to our joint account every month to cover rent, groceries, and his car payments. Silas tapped his tablet screen. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. He did not look up. Harlan frowned, his thick eyebrows knitting together. A small inheritance allowance? And Rick told you this money was necessary for survival? Yes, I said. He said his bonuses were tied up in equity. He said we were building a future. Silas walked over to the desk. He placed a thin file folder in front of me. It was labeled Raven 13 Trust. Ms. Vance, Silas said, his tone clinical. 20 years ago, when your parents' will was executed, the Raven 13 Trust was established to support you during the challenge period. It was designed to pay out a living stipend hidden under the guise of a small annuity. I nodded. I know. $2,000 a month. That is what I transferred to Rick. Silas opened the folder. He slid a bank statement across the mahogany surface. You never checked the source documents, did you? Silas asked gently. You just signed the transfer orders that Rick prepared for you. I looked at the numbers. My breath hitched. The monthly payout from Raven 13 was not $2,000. It was adjusted for inflation and market performance, Silas said. The monthly deposit into the account you gave Rick access to is approximately $42,000. The room spun. 42,000? I whispered. But we lived in a rented apartment with drafty windows. We ate pasta 5 nights a week. I drove a used Honda that broke down every winter. You lived in a rented apartment, Harlan corrected, his voice hard. Rick drove a leased Porsche Cayenne, did he not? Beverly wore designer labels. Kylie went to a private art college for 3 semesters before dropping out. Who do you think paid for that? I felt sick. Physically sick. I did. You did, Harlan confirmed. For 20 years, you have been the primary breadwinner of the Dalton family. You were not a leech, Meredith. You were the host body. I stared at the paper. Every time Beverly mocked me for being useless, she was wearing clothes bought with my parents' money. Every time Rick told me to budget better for groceries, scolding me for buying name-brand cereal, he was siphoning tens of thousands of dollars into his own pockets. But that is just theft, Harlan said, leaning forward. Theft is common. Greedy men are common. What Silas found next is not. Silas slid a second document forward. It was a complex network graph, lines connecting various shell companies. In the center was a black circle labeled Dalton Consulting. We pulled the balance sheet for Rick's company, Silas said. It is bleeding. It has been insolvent for 18 months. But the debt structure is fascinating. I looked at the red column. $9 million. I gasped. How can a small consulting firm owe $9 million? Bad bets on real estate futures, Silas explained. But look at the lenders. 3 local banks hold about 20% of the debt. The rest, nearly $7 million, is held by a private equity firm called Obsidian Ridge Capital. Harlan tapped the table with his index finger. I know every major player in the state, Meredith. I know the sharks, and I know the whales. I have never heard of Obsidian Ridge Capital. And when I do not know a name, it means it is a mask. My head was pounding. The betrayal of the money was bad enough, but this felt like something darker. Something that had been rotting beneath the floorboards of my marriage for a very long time. We dug into the incorporation papers of Obsidian Ridge, Silas continued, his voice void of emotion, which only made the facts more terrifying. It is registered in Delaware, but its parent company is an offshore entity in the Caymans. And that entity is fully owned by a holding group based in New York. Silas swiped the tablet, projecting an image onto the large screen on the wall. It was a logo, a golden sun with sharp, mechanical rays. My blood ran cold. I had grown up seeing that logo on the letterheads of lawsuits filed against my grandfather. Apex Corp, I whispered. Apex Corp, Harlan said, spitting the name out like a curse. Our oldest, dirtiest rival. For 40 years, they have tried to break VANCE Dominion's grip on the Midwest logistics corridor. Check the dates, Silas said, pointing to the timeline on the screen. I looked. The first investment from Obsidian Ridge into Rick's company was dated exactly 20 years and 3 months ago. That is. I did the math in my head. That is the month Rick and I started dating. That is the month he bumped into me at the library. Exactly, Harlan said. He did not fall in love with you, Meredith. He was recruited. He was a chip, a sleeper agent planted by Apex to get into my house. They funded his failing business, kept him afloat, and gave him the lifestyle he needed to seduce a VANCE heiress. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just a bad marriage. It wasn't just a man falling out of love. It was an operation. Every kiss, every I love you, every moment of intimacy had been a line item in a corporate espionage budget. So why now? I asked, my voice trembling. If I am their golden ticket, why throw me out in the snow? Why destroy the asset? Because the mission failed, Silas said bluntly. You broke the pattern. You didn't bring him into the fold. You adhered to the challenge. You refused to ask Sir Harlan for a job for him. You cut yourself off from the family fortune to prove your love. You became useless to them as an intelligence source. And 2 weeks ago, Harlan added, I personally rejected a merger proposal from an Apex subsidiary. They realized they had no leverage. The chip was dead. So they called in the debt. Silas finished the thought. Obsidian Ridge demanded the $7 million back. Rick panicked. He knew he was drowning. He needed cash fast. He tried to squeeze you for the trust fund transfer, the divorce settlement, everything he could grab to pay off his masters before they broke his legs. I sat back in the chair, the leather creaking. The cruelty of the night made sense now. The rush to sign the papers. The blackmail. The desperation in his eyes that I had mistaken for anger. He wasn't just an abuser. He was a terrified rat caught in a trap he had built himself. He had sold 20 years of my life for a paycheck, and when the paycheck stopped, he tried to liquidate me. The room fell silent. The only sound was the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. Tick. Tock. Tick. Tock. I looked at the timeline on the screen. 20 years. My youth. My ability to have children. My dreams. All of it, harvested by a man who looked at me and saw nothing but an access code to a bank vault. Harlan stood up. He walked around the desk and stood in front of me. He leaned down, resting his hands on the arms of my chair, trapping me in his gaze. I have one question, Meredith, he said softly. And the answer will determine everything we do next. I looked up into his steel-gray eyes. Do you still love him? The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Do I still love him? I closed my eyes. I searched my heart. I looked for the pain of heartbreak. I looked for the longing I thought I would feel. I remembered the man who made me coffee in the mornings. I remembered the man who held me when I cried about my parents. I remembered the way he smiled when I managed to save $50 on the grocery bill. But then, I overlaid that image with the truth. I saw the $42,000 a month. I saw the Porsche he hid. I saw the Apex logo. I saw the moment he ripped my dress. I saw the moment he threw me onto the ice. I realized that the man I loved, the struggling, sweet, slightly clumsy Rick, never existed. He was a character played by an actor. He was a construct designed to mirror my own desires back to me. I didn't love Rick Dalton. I loved the performance. And looking at the bruising on my arm, looking at the network of lies on the screen, I realized something else. I hated the performance. It was a bad act. It was sloppy. I do not know who he is, I said. My voice was steady. It surprised me. I loved a man named Rick Dalton who was a struggling consultant. That man is fiction. And I do not love actors who forget their lines. I looked at Harlan. I feel nothing, grandfather. I feel like I have woken up from a coma. Harlan stared at me for a long second. Then, he nodded, a slow, satisfied nod. Good, he said. He straightened up and looked at Silas. Then we are not discussing an ex-husband anymore. We are discussing a corporate saboteur who has infiltrated our family and assaulted a board member. A board member? I asked, confused. But I haven't been on the board since I was 22. You never left the board, Meredith, Harlan said, walking back to his desk. I kept your seat warm. You are the largest shareholder of VANCE Dominion. You always have been. He pressed a button on his intercom. Prepare the guest wing. And tell the kitchen to start the high-protein protocol. He looked back at me. Go to sleep, Meredith. Tonight, you mourn the illusion. Tomorrow morning at 4:45, you start training. Training? I asked. If you want to survive the war that is coming, Harlan said, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous light, you need to stop being a victim and start being a VANCE. You need to remember who you were before you decided to play house with a shark. I stood up. My legs were still sore, but they held my weight. I looked at the reflection in the dark window. I saw a middle-aged woman with messy hair and a bruised face. But beneath that, I saw the shadow of the girl who had graduated top of her class. She was still there. She was just buried under 20 years of laundry and lies. I don't just want to survive, I said. I want to destroy him. Harlan smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Then get some rest. Class starts at dawn. The alarm on my phone, a new encrypted model Silas had given me, vibrated against the mahogany nightstand. At exactly 4:45 in the morning. I woke up instantly. There was no grogginess, no hitting the snooze button. For a split second, I looked at the silk canopy above my bed and forgot where I was. I expected the peeling paint of the Chicago apartment. I expected the smell of stale beer from the living room where Rick often fell asleep. Then the silence of Raven's Gate settled over me. I was safe. But safety was not the goal anymore. I rolled out of bed. My body screamed in protest. The bruises from the concrete stairs were turning a sickly shade of yellow and green, mapping the violence across my ribs and thighs. I ignored them. I walked down to the estate's private gym. It was a glass-walled facility overlooking the snow-covered grounds, filled with equipment that cost more than Rick's entire fraudulent company. A man was waiting for me. He was built like a tank, with a buzz cut and tattoos creeping up his neck. Rafa Nolan, he said, not offering a hand. Former recon Marine. Silas hired me to make sure you do not break. I am already broken, I said, tying my hair back. Emotional breaks are not my department, Rafa said, pointing to a treadmill set at a steep incline. Physical resilience is. If you want to survive at the top of American finance, Ms. Vance, your body has to be able to handle the cortisol levels of a war zone. Because that is what a boardroom is, a war zone with better furniture. He started the machine. For the next 90 minutes, I ran until my lungs burned. I punched a heavy bag until my knuckles, wrapped in tape, throbbed in rhythm with my heart. I did push-ups on a mat, feeling the strain in my bruised shoulders. With every drop of sweat that hit the floor, I visualized a piece of the old Meredith falling away. The Meredith who cooked pot roast to please a man who hated her. The Meredith who apologized for taking up space. The Meredith who thought love was about making herself smaller so he could feel big. I left that Meredith on the gym floor. At 8 a.m., showered and dressed in a sharp gray blazer that Silas had procured, I sat in a small conference room. Across from me was Dr. Mariah Keene. She had been my tutor at Wharton. She looked exactly the same, severe glasses, a tablet, and a mind like a supercomputer. Mergers and acquisitions, she said, projecting a slide onto the wall. Distressed assets. Hostile takeovers. We are reviewing the syllabus you abandoned 20 years ago. I remember the basics, I said. Basics are for analysts, Dr. Keene countered. You need to understand the language of predation. Look at this contract. She slid a document across the table. It was a standard loan agreement. Tell me where the trap is, she ordered. I scanned the legal jargon. It was like reading a language I hadn't spoken since childhood. At first, the words swam. But then, patterns emerged. My brain, dormant for so long, began to fire. Clause 14b, I said, pointing. The cross-default provision. If the borrower defaults on any other debt, this loan becomes immediately due in full. Correct. Dr. Keene nodded. That is how you kill a company without firing a single bullet. You buy their small debts, trigger a default, and then call in the big loan. It is a domino effect. I realized then that my ignorance had been a choice. I had spent 20 years playing dumb because I thought it made me more lovable. I had dimmed my own intelligence to make Rick shine. It was the most pathetic realization of my life. I want to learn how to do this, I said, staring at the claws. I want to learn how to trigger the dominoes. By 2 p.m., I was in the legal wing of the estate with Jonah Red, the head of VANCE Dominion's legal counsel. The room was lined with books, the windows looking out over the pristine white gardens. Jonah handed me a copy of the divorce papers I had signed in the kitchen. These are garbage, Jonah said, tossing them onto the table. Signed under duress, no independent counsel, assets hidden. We can tear this apart in court in 5 minutes. No, I said, picking up the pen. I do not just want to tear it up. I want to understand exactly how he tried to screw me. Jonah spent the next 3 hours walking me through the fraud. He showed me where Rick had undervalued the company. He showed me the hidden accounts. He showed me how the lawyer, Rick's family attorney, had structured the document to leave me with debt I didn't even know existed. For the first time, I was not just a passenger in my own legal disaster. I was the navigator. I was not relying on a lawyer to save me. I was using the law as a sword. We are going to countersue, I said, circling a paragraph about spousal support. And we are going to file for criminal fraud. Jonah smiled, a sharp, shark-like grin. I have already drafted the motion. But the hardest part came at 7 p.m. Candace Ayel, a crisis management expert who had handled scandals for senators and CEOs, set up a projector in the media room. Watch, she said. On the screen, Kylie's video played. It was grainy, shaky footage of me being dragged out of the apartment. The Mickey Mouse ears filter bobbed over my terrified face. The comments scrolling on the side were brutal. Pathetic. She deserves it. Look at her cry. I wanted to look away. I felt the bile rise in my throat. Do not look down, Candace commanded. Look at her. Look at the victim. I forced myself to watch. I watched myself fall. I watched myself beg. Now, Candace said, turning off the projector. Tell me the story. But do not tell it like a victim. Tell it like a survivor who is coming back for blood. We practiced for hours. I learned how to sit, how to angle my chin so I looked defiant, not defeated. I learned how to pause when a reporter asked a painful question, not to hide the pain, but to let the silence make the audience uncomfortable. You do not hide the scar, Candace said, adjusting my posture. You show them the scar, and you say, look what I survived. Now imagine what I can do to you. I went to bed that night exhausted, my mind buzzing with statutes and strategies. I was sore, I was tired, but for the first time in 20 years, I was not cold. The fire was lit. And tomorrow, I was going to burn them all. 2 days later, the call came. Harlan summoned the board of directors to the headquarters in downtown Chicago. It was an emergency meeting, and the atmosphere was thick enough to choke on. The boardroom was a cavernous space of glass and steel, filled with men and women who controlled billions of dollars of capital. These were people who could shift the GDP of a small country with a signature. And I was about to walk in there and tell them that their CEO's granddaughter had been playing house with a con artist for 20 years. I walked in behind my grandfather. I was wearing a white suit. It was a deliberate choice, the color of mourning in some cultures, the color of rebirth in others. But mostly, it was a statement. I was not hiding in black. I was not blending in. Ladies and gentlemen, Harlan announced, standing at the head of the table. He leaned on the new cane Silas had bought him, this one tipped with silver. We are facing a hostile infiltration by Apex Corporation. Murmurs rippled through the room. Papers shuffled. They used my granddaughter's husband to penetrate our family, Harlan continued, his voice steady, though I saw the tightness in his jaw. To counter this, I am appointing a new executive vice chair. He pointed to me. Meredith Vance. A heavy-set man at the end of the table scoffed. That was George Pendergast, a man who had been trying to oust my grandfather for a decade. He spun a gold pen between his fingers, looking at me with undisguised contempt. With all due respect, Harlan, Pendergast said, his voice oily. She has been a housewife for 20 years. Her biggest negotiation was probably with a plumber. She has no experience. The room went silent. The disrespect was palpable. I felt the old Meredith, the one who apologized for existing, try to shrink back. But then I remembered the freezing concrete. I remembered the bruise on my arm. I didn't sit down. I walked to the head of the table, placing my hands flat on the polished mahogany. You are right, Mr. Pendergast, I said. My voice was calm, projected perfectly thanks to Candace's training. I have been a housewife. Which means I know exactly how to spot a lie, how to stretch a budget until it screams, and how to clean up messes that men like you leave behind. Pendergast sneered. We are dealing with Apex Corp, Mrs. Dalton. Not a bake sale. And I have 20 years of intimate knowledge of their primary operative, I countered, cutting him off. I lived with him. I slept next to him. I know Rick Dalton's weaknesses, his financial structure, and his psychological profile better than any analyst in this room. I signaled to Silas. He projected a slide onto the screen. It was the flow of funds from the Raven 13 Trust into Rick's shell companies. Rick Dalton is not a genius, I said, pacing the room. He is a man with a gambling addiction and a need for validation. He funneled my money, Vance money, into real estate futures that Apex advised him on. He is leveraged to the hilt. And because I know where he hides his money, I know where Apex hides their connection. I pointed to a sub-account on the screen. This offshore account in the Caymans? Rick thinks it is untraceable. But I know the password. It is the date of our first date. A few chuckles rippled through the room. Pendergast stopped spinning his pen. I have access to his digital life because he was arrogant enough to use the same cloud server for his business that we used for our family photos, I continued. I have the emails, Mr. Pendergast. I have the wire transfers. And I have the motivation to burn him down that none of you possess. I looked Pendergast straight in the eye. You want to fight Apex with spreadsheets? Go ahead. I am going to fight them with their own dirty laundry. Harlan smiled. It was barely visible, but I saw it. I moved to confirm the appointment, a woman near the center of the table said. She was the head of the audit committee. She knows the target. That is an asset we cannot buy. The vote passed with only one dissent, Pendergast. I walked into my new office on the 45th floor. It was a corner suite with a view of the entire city. On the desk, a small box of business cards was waiting. I picked one up. The cardstock was heavy, cream-colored. The letters were embossed in black ink. Meredith Vance, Executive Vice Chair. Vance Dominion Group. I ran my thumb over the letters. It felt heavy. It wasn't just a title. It was a weapon. It was a shield. It was a promise to every shareholder, every employee, and every woman who would ever read my story. I slipped the card into my wallet, sliding it into the slot where I used to keep my grocery discount card. The contrast was stark. I walked into the private bathroom attached to the office. I looked in the mirror. The bruise on my neck was fading to a dull yellow. My eyes looked different. The softness was gone. The naivety was gone. Rick, I whispered to my reflection. Beverly. Kylie. You took my dignity. You took my trust. You took 20 years of my life. I straightened my blazer. Now I am going to take everything you have. And I am going to make you watch. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just turned off the light and walked out to my desk to start the war. Exactly 1 week after being thrown onto the concrete like a bag of expired meat, I returned to 403 West Huron. I did not come in a cab. I did not come on foot. I drove a white Bentley Continental GT, the engine purring like a tamed lion as I pulled into the small, cracked asphalt lot reserved for residents. The car looked alien here, a spaceship of pearl and chrome docked in a harbor of rusted Toyotas and salt-stained Fords. I stepped out. The air was still bitter, but I did not feel it. I was wearing a bespoke white wool coat cut sharp enough to draw blood, and a pair of nude heels that clicked with authority on the pavement. The security guard, a man named Gary who used to pretend he didn't hear Beverly screaming at me in the lobby, rushed out of his booth. His eyes widened as he took in the car, the shoes, and the cold, diamond-hard look in my eyes. Mrs. Dalton, he stammered, fumbling with the door. Ms. Vance, I corrected, not stopping. I walked past him to the guest log. I didn't sign in. I just looked at him. I am here to collect my property. I took the elevator up. The smell of stale cigarettes and old carpet was the same, but the woman breathing it in was different. I knocked on door 3C. I heard the familiar sound of multiple locks tumbling, a paranoid symphony of metal on metal that Beverly insisted on. The door cracked open. Beverly stood there. She looked like a ghost of the woman who had laughed at me 7 days ago. Her silk robe was stained with something dark, probably wine. Her hair was a rat's nest of unwashed curls. Dark circles hung under her eyes like bruises. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the bright hallway light, and then they widened in shock. You? She hissed. She tried to slam the door. No, I said. I put a gloved hand on the door and pushed gently, but with the weight of $1 billion corporation behind me. The door swung open, forcing Beverly to stumble back into the entryway. Silas and a junior associate from our legal team stood behind me in the hallway. They did not enter. They were the silent threat, the looming shadow. I stepped inside alone. The apartment was a disaster zone. Empty beer bottles littered the coffee table. Dirty dishes were piled high in the sink, creating a smell of rotting food that mingled with the scent of fear. What are you doing here? Beverly spat, backing away toward the kitchen island. Did you come to beg? Did you realize no one wants a used wife? I set my Hermes bag on the dining table, the same table where I had been forced to sign my life away. I looked at her with absolute calm. No, I said. I came to collect the only thing in this apartment that has any value. I walked past her into the small bedroom I used to share with Rick. The bed was unmade. The closet door was open, revealing empty hangers where my clothes used to be. Rick must have thrown them out or burned them. I knelt by the bottom drawer of the nightstand. I pulled it open. There, pushed to the back, was a small, battered wooden box. I opened it. Inside were 2 photos of my parents and a simple gold band, my mother's wedding ring. I had forgotten it in the chaos of that night. I slipped the ring onto my pinky finger and closed the box. I walked back to the living room. Beverly was watching me, her hands gripping the counter, her knuckles white. Get out, she screamed. Or I call the police. Please do, I said. It would save my team the trouble of serving you. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I slapped it onto the table. The sound was like a gunshot. This is a formal notice of intent to sue, I said, my voice flat. Criminal fraud, coercion, embezzlement of trust funds, and theft of personal property. You and Rick are listed as co-defendants. Beverly stared at the envelope. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You should read the appendix, I added. It contains a frame-by-frame breakdown of the video Kylie took. It turns out filming yourself committing assault and extortion is not the legal defense you think it is. The bathroom door creaked open. Kylie stepped out. She looked terrible. She was wearing the same hoodie from the video, but she looked smaller inside it. Her eyes were swollen puffs of red. She was holding her phone, but not to film. The screen showed a notification from her bank account, frozen due to suspicious activity. She looked at me, then at the envelope, then at Beverly. She walked quickly over to me, grabbing my arm near the kitchen. "Meredith," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Listen, if you help me, if you leave me out of this, I will give you the texts." "What?" Beverly screeched. "Kylie." "I have screenshots," Kylie continued, ignoring her mother, her eyes desperate. "Messages between Mom and that guy from Obsidian. Messages where they talk about setting you up. I can send them to you right now." I looked down at her hand on my white sleeve. I gently peeled her fingers off as if removing a leech. "You are offering to sell your mother to save yourself?" I asked. "I don't want to go to jail," Kylie cried softly. I just held the phone. "Meredith, please." She made me do it. I looked at the girl who had used a Mickey Mouse filter to mock my pain. I realized she wasn't a mastermind. She was just a hollow, cowardly child who broke things she didn't understand. "Keep your screenshots," I said coldly. "When the time comes, my lawyers will depose you, and you will tell them everything under oath in a federal court. I don't need your charity, Kylie. I have the truth." I picked up my bag and walked to the door. I paused and looked back at the two of them, the mother paralyzed by rage, the daughter paralyzed by fear. "Enjoy the apartment," I said. "While you still have it." I walked out. If you have made it this far into the story, please hit that like button and comment the number 1 below. It lets me know that you are amazing, and that you are standing right here with me on this journey. Your support is the fuel that keeps this fire burning. Comment 1 so I can see you, and now, let's see what happens when the first domino falls. To catch a liar, sometimes you have to become one, but only for a little while. Under Silas's meticulous direction, I shed the skin of Meredith Vance, the grieving heiress, and slipped into the persona of Elena Stone, a sharp-tongued investigative reporter for American Titan Monthly. I wore non-prescription glasses with thick black frames, pulled my hair back into a messy, workaholic bun, and carried a digital recorder that looked beaten up enough to be credible. My target list contained 3 names. 3 women who thought they were the love of Rick Dalton's life, or at least his priority. They didn't know they were just line items on his fraudulent balance sheet. I traveled to 3 different cities in 3 days: Minneapolis, Madison, and St. Louis. My first stop was a high-end gym in Minneapolis to meet Lena Ortiz. Lena was beautiful in a terrifying, sculpted way. She was a fitness influencer with a massive following, the kind of woman who made you feel guilty for eating a carb. She met me in the juice bar, arms crossed, defensiveness radiating off her like heat. "I don't talk to reporters," Lena said, stabbing a straw into her green smoothie. "Especially not about Rick. We are private. Besides, I know what you are going to write. You are going to paint me as the other woman." "I am not here to write about affairs, Lena," I said, keeping my voice professional. "I am writing about financial fraud in the influencer economy. Specifically, how managers steal commissions." I slid a document across the metal table. It was a bank statement from Dalton Consulting. "Rick manages your sponsorship deals, right?" I asked. "He helps me," she corrected. "He takes 10%. It is standard." "He takes 10% on paper," I said. "Look at line 4. Lena looked. I watched her eyes narrow. "That is a payment from Pinnacle Sportswear," she said. $50,000. "Correct," I said. Now look at what was deposited into your account on the same day. 5,000, she whispered. He told me the contract was only for 5,000. He said the brand was lowballing me. I flipped the page. And here. And here. In total, over the last 18 months, Rick Dalton has diverted nearly $300,000 of your earnings into his company's operating account to pay off his own debts. Lena went still. The aggression drained out of her face, replaced by a horrifying realization. He told me that money was in a savings account, she stammered. For our wedding. He said he was investing it so we could buy a house in Cabo. She slammed her hand down on the table hard enough to make the smoothie jump. That son of a b***tch. He stole my wedding fund to pay his rent? He stole your wedding fund to pay the interest on a loan he owes to a shark, I corrected. I left her fuming and drove to Madison. Martha Hales was a different kind of victim. She was in her late 40s, elegant, tired, the owner of a boutique furniture brand. We met in the back office of her showroom, surrounded by swatches of velvet and silk. Rick is a brilliant consultant, Martha told me, though her voice lacked conviction. He connected me with a growth fund, Obsidian Ridge. They invested $2 million to help me expand. And what is the interest rate on that capital? I asked. Martha looked away. It is aggressive. But Rick said it was the only way to scale. He charged me a consulting fee for making the introduction. Of course. Nearly $500,000, I said, checking my notes. Martha flinched. He said it was standard. I pulled out a printed email thread Silas's team had scraped from Rick's server. Read this, I said. It was an email from Rick to an account linked to Apex. Subject, Hales Boutique Liquidity. Body, she is over-leveraged. If we push the supply chain costs up by 15% next quarter, she will default. Then you can acquire the brand assets for pennies on the dollar. The IP alone is worth $5 million. Martha read the email twice. Her hands began to shake. She looked up at me, her eyes wet. He isn't helping me expand, she whispered. He is fattening me up for slaughter. He sold you to a corporate raider, Martha, I said softly. And he charged you $500,000 for the privilege of digging your own grave. My final stop was St. Louis, to meet Riley James, a 24-year-old grad student. She looked young, hopeful, and completely naive. She was clutching a latte like a lifeline. Rick loves me, she said, her voice high and defensive. He is only with his wife because he feels sorry for her. She is disturbed. She cheats on him. The video in the cafe? I asked. The one where she is with the older man? Yes, Riley said. I saw it. She was with her lover. I placed a tablet on the table. I want you to watch the unedited footage. I pressed play. It showed me sitting across from the older man, Arthur Sterling disguised as a lawyer. We were not holding hands. We were not kissing. I was crying, wiping my eyes with a napkin. The audio, enhanced by Silas's people, was clear. My voice, I just want to make sure the name change is legal. I want to be a Dalton fully. I want to leave the VANCE legacy behind. Sterling's voice, I will file the paperwork. Your parents would just want you to be happy. Then, the video shifted. It showed the timestamp of when the clip Riley saw was uploaded. It traced the IP address. That IP address, I pointed to the string of numbers, belongs to a smartphone registered to Kylie Dalton, Rick's sister. Riley stared at the screen. But, he said she was a monster. He said she treated him like a servant. He lied, I said. He needed you to believe he was the victim so you would do his research papers for him. That is what you do, right? You write his urban planning proposals? Riley lowered her head. Yes. For 2 years. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the sound of 3 hearts breaking across 3 different cities. But as I looked at Riley, I didn't see a rival. I saw myself at 22. Stupid, trusting, and used. "We are meeting in Chicago on Friday," I told her, handing her a card with an address. "All of us. Lena, Martha, and you. It is time you met the real wife." Back at Ravensgate, the war was fighting on 2 fronts. While I was gathering Rick's victims, Silas and Harlan were hunting the traitors inside our own walls. It had bothered me, the photo of the lover. The man I knew as Mr. Henderson, the kindly family lawyer who had helped me with the name change paperwork years ago. Why did Rick use a photo of him? Why not a random stranger? Silas walked into the library where Harlan and I were reviewing the files. He looked grim. "We ran facial recognition on the cafe video," Silas said. "And we cross-referenced it with the Apex employee database." He tossed a file on the desk. "The man is not Mr. Henderson. There is no Mr. Henderson. The man in the video is Arthur Sterling." Harlan stiffened. "Sterling? My former junior counsel? I fired him 15 years ago for taking bribes." "He had surgery," Silas said. "Nose, chin, hairline. He changed his appearance and reinvented himself as a solo practitioner. He has been on the Apex payroll for a decade. He was planted to be Meredith's attorney." My blood ran cold. He handled my name change. He handled, oh my God, the divorce papers. "Exactly," Silas said. "Sterling orchestrated the divorce papers to ensure you were stripped of your assets legally, so Apex could seize them through Rick's debt. It wasn't just a messy breakup. It was a conspiracy. Wire fraud, identity theft, and organized racketeering." "This changes everything," I said. "This isn't just a civil suit anymore. This is a RICO case." "Indeed," Harlan said, his eyes narrowing. "But Sterling is just a tool. Someone had to let him in. Someone inside VANCE Dominion had to vouch for Rick 20 years ago to get him that internship." Harlan turned his chair toward the window. "Silas, bring me the personnel file for Graham Toever." Graham Toever. He was a board member. A quiet man, always voting with the majority. He had been at my wedding. He had given us a toaster. Half an hour later, Graham sat in the same chair I had occupied days ago. He looked small. He saw the file on the table, photos of a penthouse in Miami, bank transfer logs from a shell company in the Bahamas. "Every time you voted to approve a vendor that turned out to be an Apex subsidiary," Harlan said, his voice terrifyingly quiet, "a consulting fee of $50,000 appeared in that Bahamian account. In total, you have taken $2 million. Graham collapsed. He didn't deny it. He just wept. "They had leverage," Graham whispered. "Gambling debts from the 90s. They owned me before I even joined the board." "You sold my family," Harlan said. "You sold my granddaughter's happiness to cover your bad bets." "I had no choice," Graham sobbed. "You had a choice," I said, standing up. "You could have come to Harlan. You could have been loyal. Instead, you let a wolf into our house." Harlan slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "Option A," Harlan said. "You resign immediately. You sign over your unvested shares to the company for $1. And you disappear. You go to a cabin in Montana and you never show your face in a boardroom again." Graham looked at the paper, his hands shaking. "And option B?" he asked weakly. "Option B," I said, "is that I hand this file to the FBI. You go to federal prison for corporate espionage and embezzlement, and your wife loses the penthouse, the cars, and her social standing." Graham picked up the pen. He signed. He left the room a broken man, stripped of his legacy in 30 seconds. Harlan turned to me. You see, Meredith? 20 years ago, you were soft. You let people walk over you because you wanted to be liked. Today, you just decapitated a traitor without blinking. I did not enjoy it, I said quietly. You are not supposed to enjoy it, Harlan replied. You are just supposed to do it. With the internal leaks plugged, we turned our attention back to the primary target. Rick Dalton was sitting in his office, likely panicking about the silence. He didn't know that the ground beneath him had already been mined. I picked up my phone. It was time to make the call. Not to him, but to the bank. Silas, I said. Initiate the debt purchase. Buy it all. Every cent he owes. Consider it done, Silas said. The trap was set. Now, we just had to wait for the rat to realize the cheese was poisoned. Financial warfare is silent. It does not sound like a gunshot or a scream. It sounds like the hum of a server farm and the scratch of a pen on a signature line. We moved under the cover of a shell company named Ravenstone Holdings. To the outside world, Ravenstone was just another aggressive distressed debt fund looking for high-risk portfolios. In reality, it was a wholly owned subsidiary of VANCE Dominion, created solely for the purpose of holding the leash of one man. In 48 hours, Ravenstone Holdings quietly purchased every single cent of debt attached to Dalton Consulting. We bought the loans from the 3 regional banks. Then, we bought the massive toxic note from Obsidian Ridge. Apex was happy to sell. They saw Rick as a liability and were eager to recoup even 60 cents on the dollar. They didn't check who was buying. They just wanted out. On Tuesday morning, the trap snapped shut. A courier delivered a formal notice to Rick's office. It was a demand for immediate repayment. The terms were brutal. Because Rick had technically defaulted on his covenants when his credit rating tanked, we, as the new primary creditor, had the right to accelerate the debt. The document stated clearly, no restructuring. No payment plans. No grace periods. Total amount due, $9,400,000. Deadline, 15 days. I can only imagine the moment he saw it. He likely scanned the legal jargon, his heart rate spiking, looking for the name of the new lender. And then his eyes would have landed on the bottom right corner of the page. There was no generic corporate logo. Instead, embossed into the heavy paper, was a small silver raven holding a key. He realized then that he did not owe money to a bank. He owed his life to me. That night, at 2:14 in the morning, my phone rang. I was awake, reviewing the forensic accounting files, but I let it ring 3 times before answering. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to imagine me sleeping soundly while his world burned. "Hello," I said. My voice was crisp, alert. "Meredith." Rick's voice was unrecognizable. It was cracked, thin, stripped of all the arrogance that had defined our marriage. "Meredith, please, you have to stop this." "Stop what?" I asked, turning a page in my file. "The debt," he rasped. I saw the notice. $9 million, Meredith? I can't pay that. Nobody can pay that in 15 days. They will liquidate me. They will take everything. They? I corrected him gently. You mean I will take everything. We were married, he pleaded. I could hear the desperation clawing at his throat. I made mistakes. I know I did. I was stressed. The business, the pressure, it made me into someone I'm not. But I still love you. Deep down. You know that. Do I? I asked. Remember the trip to Lake Geneva? He said, his voice speeding up, manic. Remember how we talked about growing old? I can change, Meredith. I can be the man you met in the library. Just call off the dogs. Please. He was gaslighting me one last time, trying to overwrite the memory of the freezing concrete with a memory of a summer vacation paid for by my own trust fund. I remember, I said. I remember you complaining that the hotel room was too small. I remember you flirting with the waitress at dinner. I was just being friendly, he cried. Meredith, please. Think about my mother. Think about Kylie. If I go bankrupt, they lose the apartment. They end up on the street. You can't do that to family. Family? I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Your mother asked if a beggar wanted to pick me up. Kylie live-streamed my humiliation. And you ripped the clothes off my back. I was scared, he sobbed. Apex made me do it. They threatened me. I know, I said. And now I am threatening you. That is how the food chain works. Help me, he whispered. Please. Just one more chance. Do you want me to save you, Rick? I asked. Or do you want me to save the women you would have destroyed next if I let you walk away? What? He stammered. I am saving the next Lena. The next Martha. The next Riley, I said. I am saving them from you. And that is enough for me. Meredith, wait. I hung up. I blocked the number. The silence that followed was the most peaceful sound I had heard in 20 years. He was drowning, and for the first time, I wasn't the one keeping his head above water. I was the ocean. While Rick was begging, Beverly was trying to run. Our surveillance team tracked her to a meeting with a real estate agent in River North. She was trying to list the apartment, the one I had paid for, the one she had barred me from, for 20% under market value. She wanted a quick cash sale. She wanted to take the money and flee to her sister's house in Florida before the tsunami hit. But Silas is thorough. The real estate agent sitting across from her, a polished woman named Sarah, was on our payroll. I need the money wired to a separate account, Beverly was saying, her hands trembling as she held a cigarette. Not the one linked to Rick. A new one. In my name. Of course, Mrs. Dalton, Sarah said soothingly. But, the title search is coming up with some irregularities. What irregularities? Beverly snapped. It is my apartment. Rick signed it over. Well, Sarah said, dragging out the vowels, checking her watch. Due to the divorce filing being contested, there is a cloud on the deed. My compliance officer needs to review the original transfer documents. It might take 48 hours. I don't have 48 hours. Beverly screamed, slamming her hand on the table. People in the coffee shop turned to stare. At that exact moment, a process server walked into the shop. He was wearing a windbreaker and carrying a tablet. Beverly Dalton? He asked. She froze. The cigarette dropped from her fingers. You are served, he said, handing her a thick packet. Court order freezing all assets pending the outcome of VANCE versus Dalton. You are legally prohibited from selling, transferring, or encumbering any property. Beverly looked at Sarah. Sarah simply closed her laptop and smiled. I am afraid I cannot list a frozen asset, Mrs. Dalton, Sarah said. Good luck with your legal issues. Beverly slumped in her chair. She realized then that she wasn't going to Florida. She was going to court, and likely from there to a cell. The final blow to the Dalton dynasty came from their masters. Apex Corp does not tolerate failure. When they sold the debt to Ravenstone, they washed their hands of Rick. But Rick, in his panic, tried to go back to the well. He went to the Apex regional office on Wacker Drive. He tried to demand a meeting with his handler. He was stopped at the turnstiles. My security team obtained the footage. It was pathetic. Rick, disheveled, wearing the same suit for 2 days, arguing with a stone-faced security guard. I have a meeting, Rick shouted. Call Mr. Vane. Tell him it is Agent Dalton. The guard looked at his screen. I have no appointment for you. And I have a strictly enforced do not admit order for a Rick Dalton. Then, Rick's phone buzzed. He looked down. It was an email. We had a copy of it courtesy of a subpoena we had prepared for the upcoming RICO case. From legal@apexcorp.com to r.dalton@daltonstrategies.com. Subject, contract termination. Mr. Dalton, due to your failure to meet key performance indicators and your breach of operational security, your consulting agreement is hereby terminated effective immediately. Any attempt to contact Apex personnel will be considered harassment and will be met with legal action. He had been a tool. A hammer they used to try and break the VANCE glass. Now that the hammer was broken, they threw it in the trash. That evening, I was in the library when my personal line rang. It was Rick again. But this time, he wasn't begging. He was whispering. She is gone, he said. Who? I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. Beverly, he rasped. She cleared out the safe. She took my gun. Meredith, she is not right. She kept pacing around the apartment, saying that if she goes down, she is taking the whole kingdom with her. Rick, if this is a trick. It is not a trick, he screamed, his voice breaking into a sob. I am scared, Meredith. She mentioned you. She mentioned your grandfather. She said fire cleans everything. I went cold. I had heard Rick lie 1,000 times. I knew the cadence of his deception. This wasn't it. This was the raw, unvarnished frequency of fear. Where is she going? I asked. I don't know, he cried. But she took the jerrycan from the garage. You need to watch your back. I hung up. My hands were shaking. I called Silas immediately. Lock down the estate, I ordered. Code red. For the next 48 hours, Ravensgate turned into a fortress. Silas doubled the perimeter patrols. The black SUVs of the security team circled the driveway like sharks. Every delivery truck was searched. Every sensor was calibrated to maximum sensitivity. Harlan tried to laugh it off. I am 80 years old, he joked over breakfast, watching 2 large bodyguards stand by the French doors. Am I supposed to be afraid of a woman who drinks boxed wine? You are supposed to be alive, I said, not looking up from my tablet. But despite the walls, despite the guns, I felt it. The sensation of being watched. It was a prickle on the back of my neck when I stood near a window, a shadow moving in the periphery of my vision. Beverly was out there, and she had nothing left to lose. The breach happened on a Thursday afternoon. I was in my makeshift office in the East Wing, on a video call with our legal team in New York. My phone vibrated on the desk. It wasn't a call. It was a text message from a burner number. An image loaded. My breath caught in my throat. It was a grainy black and white photo, taken from a high angle, likely a hacked security feed. It showed a man walking near the service entrance of the estate. He was wearing a gardening hat, but I recognized the posture, the slight limp. It was Harlan. He was stepping into the back of a white delivery van. Then the text came, if you want to see him breathe again, come to Warehouse 7, Vance Logistics Park. Alone. No cops. Or I light the match. I dropped the phone. I ran out of the room, shouting for Silas. I sprinted down the hallway to the main library where Harlan usually spent his afternoons. Empty. I ran to the front door. The head of security met me, looking pale. Where is he? I screamed. He went for a walk, the guard stammered. He said he was going to check the rose garden with the new groundskeeper. But the cameras on the south gate went dark 5 minutes ago. The groundskeeper? I whispered. It was a trap. I ran back to my room. My first instinct was to grab my keys and drive, to speed down the highway and tear the warehouse apart with my bare hands. But then I stopped. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I saw the woman Rafa had trained. I saw the woman Dr. Keene had taught to think 3 steps ahead. Fear is the excuse people use to make mistakes. I picked up my phone. I forwarded the message and the photo to Silas. Do not sound the alarm, I told him when he picked up. If she hears sirens, she will kill him. She is unstable. We can be there in 20 minutes, Silas said, his voice icy calm. I will have a tactical team approach from the rear. But Meredith, if you go in there, you are the bait. I know, I said. I need a wire. Check your heel, Silas said. The left shoe. The Rafa special. I looked down at my boots. I had forgotten. Rafa had installed a localized GPS tracker and a silent panic button in the heel. I am going, I said. Give me 10 minutes inside. Then breach. Meredith. Silas's voice cracked slightly. Be careful. I hung up. I put on a heavy wool coat, hiding the diamond necklace I was wearing, not for vanity, but because it could be used as a bargaining chip. I took the keys to a nondescript SUV from the garage, leaving the Bentley behind. The drive to the industrial district was a blur of gray sky and dirty snow. Warehouse 7 was an abandoned facility on the edge of the VANCE logistics park, a place we hadn't used in years. It sat in a wasteland of rusted shipping containers and frozen mud. I parked the car 50 yards away, behind a stack of pallets. I stepped out. The air smelled of ozone and impending snow. I walked toward the corrugated metal door. It was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The inside of the warehouse was cavernous and dark, lit only by a few flickering fluorescent strips hanging from the ceiling. The air was thick, heavy with a smell that made my stomach turn. Gasoline. High-octane, industrial-grade fuel. I am here. I shouted, my voice echoing off the metal walls. I am alone. Walk to the center, a voice rasped from the shadows. I walked. My boots crunched on the concrete floor. In the middle of the open space, under a single buzzing light, sat a wooden chair. Harlan was tied to it with thick zip ties. His mouth was taped shut. His eyes were wide, but not with panic. He looked furious. Surrounding his chair, in a wide, glistening circle, was a pool of liquid. The gasoline fumes were so strong they made my eyes water. Stop right there, the voice commanded. Beverly Dalton stepped out from behind a rusted forklift. She looked like a skeleton wrapped in rags. She had lost 20 pounds in 2 weeks. Her eyes were sunken, rimmed with red, burning with a manic, chemical light. She was holding a red plastic jerry can in one hand. In the other, she held a cheap, disposable blue lighter. Look at you, she cackled, her voice sounding like grinding gears. The queen of the VANCE empire. You look so pretty in your expensive coat. Does it keep you warm? Let him go, Beverly, I said, keeping my hands visible. This is between you and me. Between us? She laughed. She splashed a line of gasoline toward my feet. I flinched, stepping back. You took my son. You took my home. You took my name. You made the whole world laugh at me. Rick committed fraud, I said calmly, my heart hammering against my ribs. You helped him. I just revealed the truth. Truth? She screamed. The truth is that money wins. And you have all the money. So now. I am going to teach you what it feels like to lose everything. She raised the lighter. Her thumb hovered over the wheel. Do not do it, I said. Beverly, listen to me. You want money? I can give you money. I want $50 million, she shrieked. Wire it now. To the account I sent you. And call your lawyers. Drop the lawsuit. Drop the charges against Rick. Or I burn this old man alive. Harlan made a muffled sound behind the tape. He was shaking his head violently. His eyes bored into mine. Do not give in. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my backup phone. Okay, I said, my voice trembling, a calculated performance. Okay, Beverly, I am doing it. Look. I am opening the banking app. I tapped the screen. I wasn't opening the bank. I was activating the signal booster for the tracker in my shoe. 1 tap. 2 taps. Hurry up! Beverly yelled, taking a step closer to the fuel puddle. If I don't see the confirmation in 1 minute, we all go. The signal is bad in here, I lied, holding the phone up. It is loading. Please, just wait. You are stalling. I am not. I cried, letting a tear slip out. I swear. Look. 50 million. I am typing the zeros. 1, 2, 3. I watched her eyes. They were darting between me and the phone. She was greedy. That was her weakness. She wanted the money more than she wanted the fire. Just let him go, I pleaded, taking a tiny step forward. You can take the money and run. My plane is at the airport. You can take it. Go to Mexico. Go anywhere. You think I am stupid? She hissed. You will track me. I won't, I said. I just want my grandfather. I glanced toward the high windows near the roof. A shadow moved. Silas's team. They were in position. I needed 10 more seconds. It is processing, I said, holding my breath. Just 1 more second. Beverly grinned, a horrific, toothy expression. Good. Because I was really looking forward to seeing if a billionaire screams louder than a poor man. She flicked the lighter. A small blue flame erupted from the nozzle. The fumes in the air seemed to vibrate. 1 drop. If she dropped it. I locked eyes with Harlan. He blinked once. Be ready. Transaction complete. I lied. Check your phone. Beverly looked down at the pocket of her coat where her phone was. For a split second, the lighter lowered. That was the moment. The sound of glass shattering above us was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Beverly stared at her phone screen. The banking notification did not appear. The 50 million she had hallucinated into existence remained a fantasy. Her face twisted from greed into a mask of pure, animalistic rage. She screamed a curse that echoed off the corrugated metal roof. Her thumb jammed down on the spark wheel of the cheap blue lighter. It happened in slow motion. The flint struck steel. A tiny yellow spark jumped from the mechanism. It wasn't a flame yet, just a hot speck of dying friction. I watched it fall. It tumbled through the air, hitting the concrete floor just inches from the edge of the gasoline pool. For a heartbeat, the chemical fumes seemed to hold their breath. The spark flared once, a bright pinprick in the gloom, and then winked out before it could ignite the vapor. We all froze. Me, Beverly, Harlan. We understood that we had just survived by a margin of millimeters. Then, from outside the heavy metal doors, a sound cut through the silence. A short, sharp chirp of a siren. The signal. Beverly's head snapped toward the door. Panic flooded her eyes, replacing the rage. She knew she was trapped. No, she shrieked. No police. I told you. No police. She raised the lighter again. This time, she wasn't aiming for the floor. She was aiming for the fumes directly in front of her. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. The fear that had paralyzed me for 20 years was gone, burned away by the adrenaline of the moment. I remembered Rafa's voice in the gym. Momentum is your weapon. I lunged. I didn't run away from the fire. I ran toward it. I kicked out with my right leg, my heavy winter boot connecting solidly with Beverly's wrist. The sound of bone cracking was sickeningly loud. The lighter flew from her hand, skittering harmlessly across the damp concrete, spinning away into the darkness. Beverly howled in pain, clutching her wrist, but she didn't stop. With her good hand, she grabbed the plastic jerry can, which still held a gallon of fuel. She swung it like a club, aiming for me. Die, she screamed. Just die. Gasoline splashed out of the spout, soaking the front of my coat. The fumes choked me, making my eyes water and my throat burn. We collided. She was thin, but she possessed the hysterical strength of a cornered rat. She clawed at my face, her nails digging for my eyes. Get down, Meredith! Harlan roared from his chair, struggling against his bonds. I felt Beverly trying to reach into her pocket. Perhaps for matches. Perhaps for a knife. I didn't wait to find out. I grabbed her by the shoulders of her filthy coat. I used her own momentum against her, pivoting on my heel and slamming her backward. I drove her into the ground, my body weight pinning her against the cold concrete. I pressed my forearm against her throat. Not enough to crush her windpipe, but enough to stop the fight. You have lost, I panted, staring into her wild eyes. It is over. Then, the world exploded with light. The warehouse doors were kicked inward with a thunderous crash. Beams of blinding white light cut through the gloom. Red laser dots danced across the walls and over us. Police! Get down! Hands visible. Men in tactical gear swarmed the space. But the first figure through the smoke wasn't a cop. It was Silas. He was moving faster than I had ever seen him, his coat flapping behind him like a cape. He reached us in 3 strides. He grabbed me by the back of my coat and hauled me off Beverly, shielding me with his own body as if he expected her to explode. Secure her! Silas shouted to the officers. 2 SWAT team members descended on Beverly. They flipped her onto her stomach. The metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut was the final punctuation mark on her reign of terror. Another officer ran to Harlan. He used a large knife to slice through the zip ties. My grandfather did not wait for a stretcher. He stood up, rubbing his wrists. He looked pale, and he swayed slightly, but he stood. He looked at the warehouse, at the gasoline, at the woman screaming on the floor, and he straightened his spine. He looked like a king who had survived an assassination attempt. Meredith, he called out, his voice hoarse but steady. I ran to him. We held each other in the middle of the crime scene, smelling of fuel and sweat, while the chaos of police procedure swirled around us. Beverly was being dragged toward the exit. She was fighting, kicking her legs, her hair a wild, matted mess around her face. She spotted me. She stopped fighting for a second, twisting her neck to look me in the eye. You took everything, she hissed, her voice sounding like dragging gravel. You thief. You took my money. You took my honor. You took my son. You are going to pay for this. The warehouse went quiet. The police officers looked at me. Silas looked at me. I stepped forward, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked down at the woman who had once made me feel small enough to fit in a trash can. I only took back what belonged to me, I said. My voice was calm, cutting through the air. As for your honor, Beverly, you burned that yourself long before you ever met me. A flash went off. A reporter had managed to slip past the perimeter cordon. The photo of me, standing tall in a gasoline-soaked coat, staring down my captor, would be on the front page of every paper in America by morning. the fallout was swift and absolute. The news that the mother of Rick Dalton had kidnapped Harlan Vance and attempted to burn him alive dominated the news cycle for weeks. The public sympathy that had already been leaning toward me now solidified into an iron wall of support. Rick was brought in for questioning 2 hours after the arrest. He sat in an interrogation room, looking at the photos of the crime scene. He looked at the jerry can. He looked at the lighter. He vomited into a trash can. Jonah Red, my lawyer, walked into the room. He placed a single document on the metal table. "This is a plea deal," Jonah said coldly. "The district attorney is ready to charge you as an accessory to kidnapping and attempted murder. Your mother called you before she did it. You knew she was dangerous. And you did nothing to stop her until it was too late." "I warned Meredith," Rick cried. "I called her." "You made one call," Jonah said. "You did not call the police. You covered your own tracks. That makes you complicit." Rick put his head in his hands. "I don't want to go to prison for murder. I didn't want anyone to die." "Then you talk," Jonah said. "You tell us everything about Apex. You tell us about Arthur Sterling. You tell us about Graham Toever. You give us the names, the dates, and the bank accounts. You help us dismantle the network." Rick looked at the mirror. He knew his life as a businessman was over. He had a choice between life in prison or a few years in a minimum security facility for financial crimes. He picked up the pen. He signed. In doing so, he destroyed a 20-year-old criminal network. His testimony led to the disbarment and arrest of 6 major lawyers and the indictment of 3 Apex Corp executives for racketeering. The trial took place 6 months later. I stood on the witness stand. I wore the same white suit I had worn the day I took over the company. I looked at the jury. The defense attorney tried to victim blame. "Mrs. Vance," he asked, pacing the floor. "You are an educated woman. A wealthy woman. If your husband was so abusive, if he was stealing from you for 20 years, why did you not leave? Why did you stay?" The courtroom went silent. It was the question every victim fears. I leaned into the microphone. "Because a predator does not start by biting," I said clearly. "He starts by feeding. He feeds you love. Then he feeds you doubt. Then he feeds you fear. By the time you realize you are bleeding, you are too weak to run. That is why we need laws. Because victims do not always know they are victims until it is too late." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Beverly Dalton was found guilty of kidnapping, aggravated assault, attempted arson, and extortion. The judge, a stern woman who had clearly been moved by the testimony, sentenced her to 25 years in federal prison. At her age, it was a life sentence. Rick Dalton was convicted of wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Because of his cooperation, he was spared the kidnapping charges. He was sentenced to 8 years. When the gavel banged, he didn't look at me. He just looked at the floor, a man who had sold his soul for a lifestyle he could never afford. Kylie Dalton, who had provided the digital evidence against her mother to save herself, received 5 years of probation and a mandate for 2,000 hours of community service. The judge also issued a permanent ban on her using any social media platforms. For a girl who lived for likes, it was a fate worse than jail. A week after the sentencing, the snow had melted in Chicago. I stood in the boardroom of VANCE Dominion with Harlan and Silas. We were looking out at the city skyline. The company's stock was at an all-time high. The Apex threat had been neutralized, their stock had tanked following the indictments, and we were currently in the process of acquiring their healthy assets for pennies on the dollar. "It is over," Silas said, pouring 3 glasses of aged scotch. "The case is over," Harlan corrected, handing me a glass. "But the work is not." He looked at me with pride in his eyes. "You fought well, Meredith. But vengeance is a hungry ghost. If you keep feeding it, it will eat you too. We have punished the people. Now, we must fix the system that created them. I nodded. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a file. The VANCE Initiative, I said. A non-profit division of VANCE Dominion dedicated to providing forensic accounting and legal defense for victims of financial abuse and marital fraud. We will fund the investigations that the police do not have the budget for. Harlan smiled. Approved. That night, I sat alone in my office. The city lights twinkled below me. I opened my laptop. I composed an email to the mailing list that had gathered since the American Titan article came out. Thousands of women. Thousands of stories. Subject: if you are trapped, you are not alone. To everyone reading this, they will tell you that you are stupid for staying. They will tell you that it is your fault for trusting. They are wrong. You are not weak. You are just waiting for your moment. And when that moment comes, we will be here to help you stand up. Yours, Meredith. I hit send. I looked at the desk. There were 2 business cards sitting side by side. The first one was heavy, cream-colored, embossed with gold, Meredith Vance, Executive Vice Chair. The second one was simple, white, with just a phone number and a name, Meredith, the listener. I picked up the second one and put it in my pocket. My revenge was finished. My war was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to my story of betrayal, justice, and rising from the ashes. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please comment below and share your thoughts on Meredith's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Zoe Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that notification bell so we can share this message of strength with even more people. You are not alone. And remember, sometimes the freezing point is just the beginning of the fire. Stay strong, and I will see you in the next story. Goodbye.